And if you read Amory Lovins' bio, and what we have in there is largely drawn from the Rocky Mountain Institute. He talks about himself, or they talk about him as a consulting experimental physicist. And I have to say that is probably the most understated description of Amory that I can conceive of, and it seems an interesting way of starting. When we announced that Amory was going to be speaking at the conference, the organizers of sessions on utilities said, "Oh, please get him to speak in our symposium and our workshops. He's great on this subject. We really got to have him." The people working on vehicles said, "Hey, get Amory. We've got to get Amory in our sessions. He's such a visionary on vehicles." And so on and so on. And I saw him this afternoon at the U.S.-China sessions where we had some folks. I think it was Clay Stranger, I think, was there from Rocky Mountain. And you probably saw Rocky Mountain people throughout the program. And every single one of them is inspired and greatly informed in detail by Amory. He is, a polymath. And how to sum him up? I mean, he is the king of soft energy. Maybe that's a right explanation. He is revered in the private sector and in the NGO community, which is a really interesting. There aren't too many people who cross such boundaries. So I'm not going to go on. I can talk a lot, and his awards and his honors, they're just legion. So I'm going to be boring. I'm simply going to hand the stage over to Amory Lovins, and that's where it's going to be really interesting for the rest of you. So Amory.
Well, thank you for a passive solar banana farmer. That's and I'm particularly honored to be here on this occasion. I knew and admired Senator Chafee, and we miss him. He did a lot of good and continues to inspire by his achievements and his example in a lot of ways that will continue to play out for a long time. And I'm very pleased to have the honor of sharing with you tonight and updating the findings of an ambitious synthesis of American energy solutions with much wider application than the United States that I think could help solve some of the problems that you've been discussing in so many of your fora today. This is work that 61 of us at RMI did over 6 quarters with much help from industry on both content and peer review. It builds on our 3 decades of practical work in all the energy-using sectors and most kinds of supply. And our findings were summarized in a graphics-rich and rigorous but readable business book, if that's not a contradiction in terms, called Reinventing Fire, which is introduced by forwards by Marv Odom, the president of Shell Oil, and John Rowe, who was then chairman of Exelon, the nation's largest nuclear and 3rd largest coal-fired utility. This may surprise you a bit when you learn what's in it. But even though they probably didn't agree with everything in it, they thought it was a useful contribution to honest discussion. We wanted to improve on this strange national conversation about energy in the United States, particularly. And if clearly stated, it would read like a really stupid multiple choice test. Namely, would you rather die of A, oil wars, or B, climate change, or C, nuclear holocaust, or D, all of the above? I missed one. How about E, none of the above? That is the choice we're seldom offered. But going back to first principles, we began by asking, what if we could make energy do our work without working our undoing? Could we imagine fuel without fear? Could we reinvent fire? And when my colleague Marty Pickett suggested that title, I've been thinking of uninventing fire. She said, no, reinventing fire, so that had to be it. We chose that big poetic title because long ago fire made us human and then fossil fuels made us modern. But now we need a new fire that makes us safe, secure, healthy, and durable. That is now practical. In fact, it works better and costs less than what we are doing. So let's see how. 4/5 of the world's energy still comes from burning each year 4 cubic miles, about 19 cubic kilometers, of the rotted remains of primeval swamp goo. And as a member of the National Petroleum Council, I should tell you, and it happens to be true, that those fossil fuels have built our civilization, created our wealth, and enriched the lives of billions of people. But their rising costs to our security, health, environment, economy are eroding, if not outweighing their benefits. So we need a new fire. And switching from the old fire to the new fire means changing two big stories, oil and electricity, each of which adds 2/5 of the fossil carbon to the air. These stories today are less than 1% connected in the United States, less than 5% in the world. But the uses of oil and electricity are similarly concentrated. 3/4 of our oil fuels transportation, 3/4 of our electricity powers buildings. The rest of both runs factories. So very efficient transportation and land use, buildings, factories, can save a lot of oil and the coal that makes 2/5 of our electricity and the natural gas that can displace both. But today's energy system isn't just inefficient. It is also disconnected, aging, dirty, and insecure, so it needs refurbishment. By 2050, though, it could become efficient, connected, and distributed with elegantly frugal autos, buildings, and factories, all relying on a secure, modern, and resilient electricity system. So in the United States, we can eliminate our addiction to oil and coal by 2050 and use 1/3 less natural gas while switching to 3-fold more efficient use and 3/4 renewables supplies. That's the transitional outline for you. Now, we found that by 2050, this could cost the United States $5 trillion less than business as usual in net present value, assuming that carbon emissions and all other hidden or external costs are worth zero, a conservatively low estimate. Yet this cheaper energy system, we found, could support a 2.6-fold bigger economy, all without needing oil or coal, or for that matter, nuclear energy. And this transition, we found, would need no new inventions and no new federal taxes, mandates, subsidies, or even laws, thus end running Washington gridlock. That's perhaps the most surprising part, so let me say it again. I'm going to tell you how the United States can get completely off oil and coal, $5 trillion cheaper, with no act of Congress led by business for profit. Now, many policy changes are needed to enable and speed that transition, but it turns out they can all be done either administratively, in fact FERC has already done most of them, or at a state level where most utility regulation and most national energy policy have long been done anyway. So this energy solution, driven by the C-suite, not by K Street, enables our most effective institutions, private enterprise co-evolving with civil society, sped by military innovation, to go around our least effective institutions. And whether you care most about profits and jobs and competitive advantage, or about national security, or about environmental stewardship, creation care, climate, public health, reinventing fire makes sense and makes money. General Eisenhower reputedly said, although his library doubts he actually said it, that expanding the boundaries of a tough problem makes it soluble by encompassing more options, more synergies, more degrees of freedom. So in Reinventing Fire, we integrated 4 all four sectors that use energy, namely transportation, buildings, industry, and electricity. And we integrated four kinds of innovation, not just the usual two, technology and public policy, but also design, the way technologies are combined, and strategy, new business models, new competitive strategies. And it turns out those combinations yield a lot more than the sum of the parts in especially creating some deeply disruptive business opportunities. Where should we start? Well, we're paying $1 billion a day, and half a year ago we were paying $2 billion a day for oil, plus another $4 billion a day, that part has not gone down, for the economic and military costs of our oil dependence. So nearly half of the oil is fueling automobiles. So a sensible place to start would be making autos oil-free. How do we do that? Well, we start with physics. 2/3 of the energy needed to move a typical car is caused by its weight. And every unit of energy you save at the wheels by taking out weight, or drag or rolling resistance, saves another 6 units of energy you don't need to waste getting it to the wheels, thus saving 7 units at the tank. Huge leverage. And yet, for the past quarter century, epidemic obesity has made our 2-ton steel autos gain weight twice as fast as we have. But today we have ultralight, ultra-strong materials like carbon fiber composites that can make dramatic weight savings snowball and can make autos simpler and, surprisingly, cheaper to build. Also, lighter and more slippery autos need less force to move them, F equals ma. Therefore, their engine gets much smaller. And then you can afford to electrify the traction because those costly batteries or fuel cells get 2 or 3 times smaller, lighter, and cheaper. And then the sticker price can converge to about today's price, and the driving cost per mile, of course, is lower from the start. So this specific sequence of innovations can transform automakers from wringing tiny savings out of essentially Victorian steel stamping and engine technology to the steeply falling costs of 3 mutually reinforcing technologies: ultralight materials, their structural manufacturing, and electric traction. And if you're exploiting 3 steep and synergistic learning curves while your competitor is out on the flat part of one, you probably win. Of course, all 3 of these curves change quickly. All of them have surprises. Electrification, in particular, is getting rapidly cheaper, and we can't know the relative speeds of those 3 curves. So if we want to remain robust and get all the benefits and harness their synergies, our strategy has to have rich optionality built in. And in fact, our transport practice at RMI is shifting its focus just from the ultralight, electric, et cetera, hypercar approach to a superset of that I call the transition from pigs to seals. Might make an interesting graphic. Pigs are personal internal combustion gasoline steel vehicles. Seals are shared electrified autonomous lightweight vehicles. So the IT meets transport mashup will have a lot of important implications even beyond what I'll describe here. Now, the sales of ultralight electric vehicles, whether shared and autonomous or not, can grow a lot faster, and their prices can drop a lot faster with a temporary fee bait that can be done at a state or regional level. That means a rebate for efficient new autos coupled with a fee on inefficient ones, and the fees pay for the rebates. This is now done in various forms in a half dozen countries. The biggest one in France, just in the first 2 years, tripled the speed of improving auto efficiency. However you do it, this shift to electric autos is going to be as game-changing as shifting from small refinements in typewriters to the dramatic Moore's Law-driven gains in computers. And of course, computers and IT are now America's biggest industry, while typewriter makers have vanished. So vehicle fitness, taking the obesity out of the car, opens a powerful new automotive competitive strategy that largely de-risks the auto business. It doubles the oil savings. It makes affordable the electrification that can save the rest of the oil. A lot of countries could be leading this revolution. the formidable barriers are much more cultural than they're technological or economic. We're, of course, helping automakers tackle them. Interestingly, the current leader is Germany. Last year, Volkswagen brought to market this 235 mile a gallon, that is 1 liter per 100 kilometer, carbon fiber plug-in hybrid. And BMW started mass producing this 1.9 liter per 100 kilometer, 124 mile a gallon carbon fiber battery electric car. BMW has confirmed that the carbon fiber is paid for by needing fewer batteries, and their CEO says, "We do not intend to be a typewriter maker," because he can look across Munich to where Olympia used to make excellent typewriters. Even 3 years ago, Audi showed a carbon fiber plug-in hybrid concept SUV rated at over 250 miles a gallon. Now, there's some interesting things that American technology can bring to this party. Some of you have seen my carbon cap, which was made 8 years ago with a technology developed by one of our spin-offs, and it was recently sold to Diefenbacher, the Tier 1 German pressmaker leader. And this part was made in 1 minute as a test piece for some military ballistic helmets that have been shipping for years. You can tell from the sound that it's extremely light and strong. We can pass it around as long as I get it back. Don't worry about dropping it. It is tougher than titanium. Tom Friedman whacked it with a sledgehammer as hard as he could. He couldn't even scuff it. And the techniques that made that can now scale to automotive cost and speed, making complex 2x2 meter parts in 1 or 2 minutes. Now, vehicles made that way can save lives because these materials can absorb 6 to 12 times as much crash energy per kilo as steel, and can also save a lot of oil. In fact, if all American cars and light trucks were made that way, it would be like finding 1.5 Saudi Arabias or half an OPEC by drilling in the Detroit Formation, a very prospective play we've been wildcatting in for a while. And those nega barrels under Detroit cost $18 a barrel, and they are, of course, domestic, secure, carbon-free, and inexhaustible. The surprise to many people is that that $18 a barrel cost of getting autos off oil, as of 3 years ago, it's probably lower now, is just to pay for the electrification because the ultralighting is roughly free. How do you do that? How about those EPA supply curves that show the cost always going up as you save more? Well, they're overlooking some things. 15 years ago, RMI's team designed this midsize SUV with a couple of European Tier 1 engineering firms. If you look inside, and this is, by the way, 67 miles a gallon on gasoline or 114 on hydrogen. If you look inside, you find that the structure is derived from an airframe. It's suspended from rings rather than built up from a tub. So it's extremely light and strong, unlike our horse and buggy legacy. And each part can be lifted with one hand and no hoist. The biggest part on the side I can briefly lift with one finger. And each of these parts is made with one low-pressure die set. Now, if this were a steel SUV, it would have 10 or 20 times more parts, each made with an average of 4 progressive steel stamping die sets. So you just saved something like 99% of the tooling cost. And then these parts snap precisely together, self-fixturing, detoleranced in 2 dimensions for bonding. So you don't need the robotic body shop. And if you lay color in the mold, you don't need most or all of the paint shop either. So there go the 2 hardest and costliest steps in making the car. And altogether, you need about 80% less capital than normal to make the car. And your propulsion system, your powertrain, gets about 2/3 smaller and therefore lighter and cheaper. And all these savings together pay for the carbon fiber, and that's why the ultralighting is roughly free. If you want to know how low can we go in the lightweighting limbo, well, 8 years ago, and not for amusement, Toyota showed this concept car that has, it's a carbon fiber plug-in hybrid. It has the interior volume of a Prius, half the fuel use, 1/3 the weight. The curb weight's 420 kilos. If it were an ordinary hybrid like most Priuses on the road today, it'd be 400 kilos. That's awfully light. It's a 70% reduction. And the day before they showed it, the world's biggest maker of carbon fiber, not by coincidence, announced a big factory to mass-produce carbon fiber car parts for Toyota, not a phrase previously much heard in the industry. And later they added 4 more automakers. So Volkswagen and BMW will soon have some worthy competitors, and not only in Japan. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if there were a China-led leapfrog in this direction, which would transform the global competitive landscape. Now, the same physics and the same business logic also apply, with some differences of detail, to heavy vehicles. Walmart's heavy trucks, the biggest civilian fleet on earth, I think, used smarter designs and logistics a couple of years ago to haul each case using 46% less fuel than in 2005. And just the technological fuel saving without the logistical gains in heavy trucks can get about a 3-fold efficiency gain. And that, plus the triple to quintupled efficiency airplanes that are on designer screens at Boeing and NASA and MIT and such, can save the United States about $0.9 trillion net present value in fuel. In both light and heavy vehicles, today's military revolution in energy efficiency, for their own operational reasons, will speed all of these advances in the civilian sector, which uses 50-odd more times more oil than the military. That's a lot of leverage. Much as military R&D in the past gave us the internet, the global positioning system, the jet engine industry, the microchip industry, a lot of the stuff that has transformed the modern civilian economy. Only this time, that leverage can speed America's path beyond oil, so we needn't fight over oil, so our warfighters can have neg missions in the Persian Gulf and the South China Sea. Mission unnecessary. As an advisor to the Chief of Naval Operations and a professor at the Naval Postgraduate School, I can assure you they really like that idea. As we design and build our vehicles smarter, we can also use them smarter. This is a graph of traffic congestion showing the typical morning and evening rush hours. And if that were an electricity load shape, how much IT-enabled load management, demand response, smart grid, peak load pricing would we throw at it to try to flatten out those peaks? Well, quite a lot. But by not yet doing that for road traffic, we are wasting many billions of dollars a year in idle people, idle vehicles, and idle roads. But instead of just watching driving double as officially forecast, although it's actually going the other way, we can cut needless driving by 4 powerful techniques. We can charge real-time driving costs per mile, not per gallon. Think of that as we reform the Highway Trust Fund. We can use smart IT to enhance transit and to empower car sharing and ride sharing. That offers very exciting new business models, since the average car sits idle 96% of the time. And in fact, some new cars due on the market in 2017 from even General Motors will have that software, including financial settlement by smartphone, all built in. We can allow lucrative smart growth real estate models, so more people are already where they want to be and don't need to be going somewhere else all the time. And we can use IT to make traffic free-flowing. So if you add up the proven performance of those methods, you end up getting the same access and mobility with about 46 to 84% less driving. That saves another $0.4 trillion, not counting $0.3 trillion more from smarter use of trucks. So 35 years from now, a far more mobile U.S. economy, notice in the subtitle, how much more mobile, a little hard to envision, can use no oil. And saving or displacing each barrel for about $25, rather than buying it for a long-run price upwards of $100, saves $4 trillion net present value. That would be $12 trillion if we counted just the hidden economic and military costs of our oil dependence, not counting any harm to environment, safety, climate, public health, global development, global stability, or our nation's independence and reputation. Now, to get mobility without oil, to phase out the oil, we can first get efficient and then switch fuels. So the savings baked into the government forecasts are at the top in magenta. The blue wedge below that is from vehicle fitness, which they didn't count because their forecasts aren't allowed to count innovation. And then the aqua wedge is for more productive use of vehicles. But then those 125 to 240 mile per gallon equivalent, that is 1 or 2 liter per 100 kilometer autos, can use any mixture of hydrogen fuel cells in green, electricity in yellow, or advanced biofuels in orange. The heavy trucks and airplanes can realistically use either hydrogen or advanced biofuels. The trucks could even use natural gas, but no vehicle will need oil. And any biofuels the U.S. might need, at most 3 million barrels a day, that little orange wedge at the bottom, could be made 2/3 from waste, and all of it without harming climate or soil and without displacing any cropland. In fact, we would probably want to pay farmers and ranchers to take carbon out of the air and put it back in tilth where it belongs, in the biodiversity of the topsoil. Our little team at RMI speeds up these oil savings by what we call institutional acupuncture. That is, where the business logic is congested and not flowing properly, we insert little needles in carefully chosen points in partners like Ford and Walmart and the Pentagon to get that entrepreneurial juice flowing. And this long transition is already well enough underway that even 5 years ago, some mainstream analysts were starting to see peak oil not in supply but in demand. Because like whale oil in the 1850s, oil is becoming uncompetitive even at low prices before it becomes unavailable even at high prices. But electrified autos don't need to add new stress, new burdens to the electricity system. Rather, when smart autos exchange electricity and information through smart buildings with smart grids, they are adding to the grid flexibility and distributed storage that help the grid to accept varying solar and wind power, so it becomes much easier to solve the electricity and auto problems together than separately. And combining these two converges the oil story with our second big story, which is saving electricity and then making it differently. And those twin revolutions in electricity are bringing more numerous, diverse, and profound disruptions to the utility sector than any other sector, because basically we got 21st century technology and speed colliding head on with 20th and even 19th century institutions, rules, and cultures, as two of our panels discussed today. Now, changing how we make electricity gets easier if we need less of it. Today, most of it is wasted, and the efficiency technologies keep improving faster than they're applied, so the potential savings get bigger and cheaper. The low-hanging fruit grows back faster than we can pick it. In fact, it's fallen all over the ground, it's mushing up around our ankles and spilling it over the tops of our waders, and we're getting in deeper and deeper. We can now save about twice as much electricity as we thought in the 80s at 1/3 the real cost, and there's no end in sight to that innovation in technology and design and better marketing and financing and delivery channels. So America's electricity use, instead of growing 1% a year as officially forecast, could actually shrink 1% a year after allowing for extra use by those efficient cars. And something like this is already happening. U.S. use of electricity peaked in 2007. It actually fell in 4 of the subsequent 6 years. I'm sorry, it fell in 5, even though we had economic growth in 4 of those years. We're not quite sure what happened last year yet. We'll find out shortly. Just in 2012, weather-adjusted, the electricity use per dollar of real GDP went down 3.4% in 1 year. We've never seen anything like that before. And we can keep demand dropping by reasonably accelerating existing trends. Specifically, over the next 40 years, U.S. buildings, which I'll remind you use 3/4 of our electricity, can triple or quadruple their energy productivity, saving $1.4 trillion net present value with a 33% internal rate of return. In other words, the savings are worth 4 times what they cost. Industry can also accelerate and double its energy productivity with a 21% internal rate of return. And to do all that by 2050, we would only need, over the next 15 years, to ramp up the national average adoption of energy efficiency to the levels already achieved in the Pacific Northwest states a decade ago. Whatever exists is possible. Now, a key to such big savings is a disruptive innovation we've long been hatching at RMI called integrative design. This often makes very large energy savings cost less than small or no savings, turning diminishing returns into expanding returns. That's how our 2010 retrofit is saving 2/5 of the energy in the Empire State Building. We started off creating a little temporary window factory on the vacant, I think, 5th floor, and remanufacturing all 6,514 windows into super windows that let light through but block heat and insulate about 4 times better. And that, plus better lights and office equipment and so on, cut the peak cooling load by 1/3. But then we could renovate smaller chillers instead of adding bigger chillers, saving $17 million at capital cost. That paid for most of the energy savings and cut the payback time to just 3 years. The same payback, by the way, that a major energy service company had offered, but using disintegrated design. They were optimizing components in isolation. We were optimizing the building as a system, so we were able to save 6 times more. Oh, and by the way, if we had counted the non-energy benefits that have greatly increased productivity and real estate value, either of those categories would cut the payback to under 1 year. Now, our latest cost-effective deep retrofit of a big office like that was this half-century-old, difficult federal office complex owned by GSA in Denver. That's a 70% saving cost-effectively. And that probably makes it more efficient than the best new U.S. office building as of 4 years ago. And that, in turn, is only half as efficient as the new office RMI is building right now in Basalt, Colorado, that we expect to move into by the end of the year. For any energy nerds in the crowd, we're shooting for an EUI of 16,000 site BTU per square foot year. We're hoping to do a bit better than that. And we're not the only ones doing this, obviously. A great many innovators, some of whom have spoken here, are doing terrific work in this area. One you might not have run into is the work of Rohan Parikh's team at Infosys in Hyderabad and Bangalore. These are the kinds of office buildings, all day-lit and largely passive, that they've been putting up at a great rate, using about 80% less energy than normal, costing about 1/10 less than normal to build, and with much happier and more productive people inside. So that's now a model for all India and beyond. Let's go look at a different kind of building. This is my own house and indoor farm and research center at the right side. That's where we hatched RMI the first 18 years. This is at 7,100 feet, 2,200 meters up in the Rocky Mountains, where the temperatures used to go before what Amory Lovins calls global weirding, down to as low as minus 47 F, minus 44 C, and we've seen as much as 39 continuous days of midwinter cloud. Nonetheless, if you come into the atrium under the glass that insulates like 16 sheets of glass but looks like 2 and costs less than 3, you find yourself in a tropical jungle with over 100 kinds of higher plants in just 85 square meters. You can see there are 2 of the 5 banana crops that were then ripening in a February snowstorm with no heating system. And up at the top is a 30-kilo pair of banana crops that harvested itself by pulling down the tree. So our latest innovation is self-harvesting bananas. Now, we're up to 56 crops so far. And when I first moved into this house in '84, having done the conceptual and energy design, it was saving about 99% of the space and water heating energy and about 90% of the household electricity and half the water, all with a 10-month payback. But since then, the technologies kept getting better, so we've now retrofitted them and are measuring how much better they are. The trouble is the measuring equipment seems to be using more electricity than the lights and appliances. So we do no combustion, that's so 20th century, and we're a net exporter of solar electricity and bananas. Now, our various partners around the world have used similar integrative design to eliminate air conditioning in ordinary-looking tract houses up to 115 F46C in California, with lower construction cost in a mature market and with better comfort. A friend used this approach in steamy Bangkok in his new house to save about 90% of the air conditioning energy with normal construction cost and better comfort. And probably about everybody in the world lives in a climate somewhere between his and mine. But wherever you live, the key is integrative design that gives many benefits from each expenditure. So this white arch that holds up the middle of the building actually has 12 different functions, but it has only one cost. Integrative design can also increase the $500 billion of conventional energy savings in industry. Dow, for example, has invested $1 billion and so far returned $9 billion of saved energy. But there's more to do. For example, 3/5 of the world's electricity runs motors, half of that runs pumps and fans. There are a lot of ways to improve pumps and fans, and indeed the motor systems that drive them, those can save about half their energy with a year's payback if you properly integrate 35 kinds of improvements instead of the normal 2 or 3, because you pay for 7 and you get 28 for free. But first we ought to be capturing bigger, cheaper savings that are normally ignored. For example, pumps, the biggest use of motors, move liquid through pipes. But a typical industrial pumping loop was redesigned to use at least 86% less pumping energy, not by getting better pumps or motors or controls, but just by replacing long, thin, crooked pipes with fat, short, straight pipes. And that also shrinks the pumping equipment and the capital cost. So we tried this in our own house and saved about 97% of the pumping energy in a new pipe run, and it cost less because the equipment was so much smaller. So this isn't new technology. It's actually just rediscovering Victorian design. It's rearranging our metal furniture as designers. And yet design often drops off the list of what to do when we talk about technology. But it's really powerful. So what does this mean for the electricity that's 3/5 used in motors? Well, from the, say, coal burned in the power plant, there are so many successive compounding losses that only 1/10 of that fuel energy comes out the pipe as flow. But now turn those compounding losses around backwards from right to left, and every unit of flow or friction you save in the pipe compounds back to save 10 units of fuel and cost and pollution and global weirding back at the power plant. And as you go back upstream again, the components get smaller and the total capital cost goes down. Our team has lately found such snowballing energy savings in over $40 billion worth of diverse industrial redesigns, from Hewlett-Packard Data Center and Texas Instruments chip fab to Rio Tinto and Anglo-American mines and Shell hydrocarbon facilities and a bunch more. Typically, on retrofit, such designs can save about 30 to 60% of the energy with a 2 or 3 year payback. And in new facilities, a bit better, say 40 to 90% with generally lower capital cost. So needing less electricity because our buildings and factories caught up and started to get efficient faster than they grew can ease and speed the shift to new sources of electricity, particularly renewables. And China leads their explosive growth and their plummeting cost, shown here on a logarithmic scale for photovoltaic modules in blue and wind farms in green. We're about to get the 2014 numbers to add, and they're still going down. Now in Germany, installed home photovoltaic systems cost only about half what they do here. We all buy the same equipment, but the German installers put it in a more streamlined way that our designers or installers are learning from too. But even so, today in about 20 of the United States, the installers will happily put solar power on your roof with no money down, perhaps soon that'll be cash back, and beat your utility bill. And Deutsche Bank says that'll work in practically all the country and about 80% of the world markets in the next couple of years. So such unregulated products could ultimately add up to a virtual utility that can bypass the power company, just like cell phones bypass the wireline phone companies. That gives electricity executives nightmares and venture capitalists sweet dreams. And something like that is happening now in, say, Hawaii. And that can, there actually, the electricity from oil is expensive enough that it's often worthwhile to put in solar power and batteries, which are also getting rapidly cheaper, and drop off the grid altogether. So we put out a paper last year called The Economics of Grid Defection, showing how that grid parity for a no backup required solution, perhaps an extreme case, not societally optimal, but that could roll across the country well within the lives of utility assets that are now on the books, and that leaves the old business models no place to hide. So Barclays, citing that paper, actually downrated the whole U.S. utility sector because the old business models aren't ready for that sort of competition. And now the solar installers like Solar City are getting their capital 200 or 300 basis points cheaper than utilities are, as the market's starting to shift its risk perception. Now, of course, there are very intelligent ways that utilities can, and some utilities do, turn that insurgency into a major business opportunity. And we have an interesting discussion and research group with all the players called eLab, Electricity Innovation Lab, whose publications are open sourced at rmi.org under Electricity and eLab, and that's helping us all think through what the next industry should look like. Now, here are some actual market prices for utility scale photovoltaic electricity on the left, wind power on the right, evolving over time, and it's a little bit of an eye chart, but it shows you there's quite rich data from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. And these are all the market prices on long-term contracts, 20 or 25-year fixed nominal price, declining real price contracts. What it amounts to is that utility scale solar power is now under $0.05 a kilowatt hour. The average new wind power contract in 2013 was 2.5 cents. The lows were under 1.8, a few cases even 1.4. And the wind, these are all net of subsidies. The wind power subsidy has expired. Who knows what will happen. But still, new projects sell their power for well under 4 cents a kilowatt hour. By the time the solar subsidy drops from 30% to 10% 2 years from now, its cost will probably have fallen even more than the 20% reduction. And of course, there are generally larger and permanent subsidies to the non-renewable competitors. I would love to see all subsidies to the energy sector removed. I hope I live to see that. But these observed market prices mean that solar and wind in many parts of the country, and soon in almost all, actually beat gas power. That's what we're seeing in the market competition that keeps driving down wholesale prices. And that is the competition that has destroyed half the market cap of the main European utilities because they bet against it and they lost. Also, it means that the capital intensity of new photovoltaics is less than that of Arctic oil, without counting the ability to get more work out of electrons than out of molecules. So last April, Bloomberg New Energy Finance, which does the most granular tracking of these trends and market prices and transactions, published this forecast of global additions to renewable energy capacity, with the rate of additions tripling over the next 15 years, while the additions of fossil and nuclear capacity fall by half, not counting those old plants' comparable or larger retirements. And here's the big picture worldwide showing the net additions of capacity, not the cumulative total installed, but how much goes in each year for wind and photovoltaics, which crossed over in 2013. The 2014 numbers are going to come in substantially higher for both. To give you a few benchmarks, in 2012, China started making more wind power than nuclear power, in which they have the world's most aggressive program. They started making more new electricity from non-hydro renewables than from all fossil and nuclear plants combined. In 2013, China added more solar power capacity than the United States has added since we invented the technology 60 years ago. We have some catching up to do. And in 2013, renewables were 68% of the new capacity added in China, 72% in Europe. This global clean energy sector is now quite a booming business, about $300 billion a year. It's created 6 million new jobs worldwide. In the US, we have more solar jobs than we have coal or steel jobs, and the solar jobs are growing about 10 times faster than general employment. Worldwide, in each of the past 4 years, this modern renewables sector got $250 billion of global private investment, which happens to be more than the market cap of all the world's traded coal companies. And they added over 80 gigawatts a year. So they've already surpassed the capacity, and next year they'll surpass the output of all the nuclear plants whose net capacity additions went negative even before Fukushima. And the coal and nuclear orders worldwide continue to dwindle simply because they have no business case. They can't compete, often just in operating cost, with modern renewables. And the modern renewables plus efficiency plus cogeneration collectively got over $600 billion of investment in 2013 alone worldwide. We're starting to talk real money. And this disruption is just starting. Here's a graph that Bernstein came up with and Jeremy Leggett popularized that he calls the terror dome, with the prices of electricity going along for many decades from conventional sources, and then suddenly there's this meteor strike of photovoltaic price and wind power price, and now they're further down. That's what a game changer, a disruptive technology looks like. The cheaper it gets, the more we build. So the cheaper it gets, so the more we build. And these modern renewables grow in a completely different way. Traditionally, we used to build just cathedral-like power plants that took years to design and license and more years to build. But meanwhile, with about the same capital, you can build each year a photovoltaic factory, which each year thereafter will produce enough photovoltaic modules that each year thereafter, each of these little icons represents the total annual output of that cathedral once you get it running. So just after the first 10 years, you're ahead by a factor of 15 on electricity produced and running away. That's why solar output worldwide is scaling faster than cell phones. We're often told, though, that only the coal and nuclear plants, the big so-called baseload plants, can keep the lights on because they are 24/7, whereas wind power and photovoltaics are variable and thus supposedly unreliable. So let me explain why neither part of that statement is true. First of all, variable does not mean unpredictable. Here is how accurately the French grid operator in a stormy winter month could forecast a day ahead the output of the nation's wind farms compared to their actual output, and I'll bet they wish they could forecast demand that accurately. And then, of course, the reason we built the grid is that no generator is 24/7. They all break. And when that happens to a big plant, you just lost 1,000 megawatts in milliseconds, often without warning, often down for weeks or months. So we built the grid to back up failed plants with working plants. And in exactly the same way, but often at lower cost, the grid can handle that it handles this intermittence of big thermal plants. The grid can also manage the forecastable variations of photovoltaics and solar by backing up those variable renewables with other renewables mainly, of other kinds or in other places. So highly reliable power can actually come from a portfolio of largely or wholly renewable sources when they are properly forecasted, integrated, and diversified in a portfolio by type and by location. So let me illustrate this with an aggressive but instructive simulation from Texas, whose isolated grid is not connected to the eastern or western U.S. grids. And in 2050, you might expect a summer week of load shape to look like that, or smaller and less peaky with profitable efficiency. So let's do all this with renewables. We'll first put in enough wind and photovoltaics, you can see how variable they are, to meet 86% of the annual electric need, and then get the other 14% from the other renewables, which are dispatchable. You can have them whenever you want, like geothermal, small hydro, solar thermal electric, whose heat storage runs into or through the night, feedlot biogas burned in existing gas turbines, municipal solid waste combustion, burning obsolete energy studies. And this 100% renewable supply, you can see, isn't terribly well matched to the load. We have some surpluses and some deficits. So let's now take the surpluses and put them into two kinds of distributed storage. And the aggressive assumption here is we'll assume that both of those are fully built out by 2050, namely ice storage, air conditioning, and smart charging and discharging of electric vehicles. And if we did that, then we could recover that distributed storage when we wanted it and fill in the remaining bits with unobtrusively flexible demand, and then we'd have reliable, all renewable supply every hour of the year without building any bulk storage, and we'd have only 5% of the annual output in this hourly simulation left over to be spilled. So the economics should be pretty good. This is not just theory. Some national grid operators are already integrating their grid operations in this way. Germany, of course, was a quarter renewable powered in 2013, about 27% last year. But there are 4 other European countries, not rich in hydro, that have been getting about half their electricity consumption from renewables, again, adding no bulk storage, and with superior reliability. For the case of Denmark, half renewable, and Germany, their reliability is the best in Europe. It's about 10 times better than ours. So much for the supposed reliability limits to wind and solar power. And the operators are just operating these grids in the way my colleague Clay Stranger describes, as the way a conductor leads an orchestra through a score. No instrument plays all the time, but beautiful music is continuously produced. Now, the National Renewable Energy Lab has shown how to provide as much as 80 or 90% renewable power on an annual basis reliably by 2050 using only centralized utility-scale renewables and adopting bulk storage equivalent to about 11% of the total renewable supply. We use the same model to simulate what happens if you make half the renewables distributed. That cuts the storage in half, and it could be distributed too. And transmission requirements, of course, go down a lot. And you can see how the daily supply stack changes as the strings and brass and woodwinds in this orchestra come in and out. But I think the evidence increasingly suggests that largely or wholly renewable power systems may need less storage and backup than utilities have already installed to manage the intermittence of their big thermal units. The most advanced national example of making power generation the right size for the job and switching to renewables would be Denmark. And over 3 decades, they've gone from a small number of big coal plants to a constellation of wind farms in blue, 86% locally owned, and cogeneration, often by burning ag wastes. And Denmark is planning all renewable energy of all forms by 2050. They don't think it'll cost extra, and they're reorganizing their grid in a cellular fashion to make cascading blackouts impossible. And this shift to mass-producible, modular, quickly deployable technologies accessible to many market actors so it can scale quickly is well underway. The economists collectively call such generators micropower. It's renewables minus big hydro plus cogeneration, combined heat and power. And micropower now makes a fourth of the world's total electricity and adds half the new capacity. That is not a fringe activity. In fact, add nuclear to that, and 48% of the world's total electricity last year was made with little or no carbon release. Not bad. Now in America we have this aging, dirty, insecure electricity system, with not much cogen, by the way, and we have to replace it anyway by 2050. So whatever we replace it with is going to cost about $6 trillion net present value. Whether we replace it with more of what we've got, or new nuclear and so-called clean coal, or centralized renewables, or more distributed renewables, surprisingly the costs work out about the same, but these four futures differ profoundly in their risks around climate, national security, fuel, water, finance, technology, and health. 7 kinds of risk. For example, our over-centralized grid is very vulnerable to cascading and potentially economy-shattering blackouts caused by squirrels, tree limbs, operational errors, solar storms, superstorms, earthquakes, rifle bullets, cyber attack. But that blackout risk disappears, and the other 6 kinds of risks are best managed with distributed renewables reorganized into so-called microgrids that normally interconnect and exchange power freely, but can isolate fractally, stand alone at need, reconnect seamlessly. That is the Pentagon strategy for military-based power supplies. It's the way my house works. And at about the same cost as business as usual, this kind of resilient grid architecture can maximize not only national and community and family security, but also customer choice and entrepreneurial opportunity and innovation. So let me summarize the electricity story. Together, efficient use and diverse, distributed, renewable, resilient supply are starting to transform the whole sector. Traditional utilities would buy a bunch of big plants of various kinds, maybe a little efficiency and renewables, and we would reward them, as we still do in about 34 states, for selling you more electricity. So guess what they do? But now, especially where regulators are instead rewarding cutting your bills, the market is shifting other way up, shifting massively toward efficiency, demand response, renewables, cogeneration, distributed storage, smart grids, all the ways to glue it together properly. And that is most true in the 30-odd states now where demand-side resources get to compete head-to-head directly against supply, and they generally win because they're cheaper. We are told that U.S. energy is permanently recommitting to fossil fuels thanks to a flood of cheap natural gas from fracking shale. Well, this graph shows that the track record of official forecasts of the real Henry Hub gas price in blue versus actual price is not very impressive. And 3 times in the past 15 years alone, investors have lost immense sums by believing those forecasts. One of those occasions, they lost over $100 billion on mistimed combined cycle gas plants that, whose operators went broke, and after a few sales for pennies on the dollar, maybe they'll make money now. And now we're in the middle of other such ructions. And we're told this time it will be different. But basic financial economics cast doubt on this because to compare a volatile price fairly with a constant price from efficiency or renewables, anyone who studied basic financial economics knows you have to adjust for risk. That is, you have to count the market value of the volatility of the gas price, and that adds a couple of bucks, more or less, to the price. You can actually discover that in the options market. History also suggests that if abundant fracked gas were actually cheap at the wellhead, it would create some supply-demand imbalances like petrochemical pivot to gas, exports of LNG, exploitation of downstream bottlenecks like pipelines, and that all increases price volatility to customers. Sure enough, gas prices almost a year ago spiked to almost $8. Now, consistent with this view, the futures market tells us that gas in a decade is going to cost not $2 or $3, but more like $6 or $8. That's not a forecast. You can buy that gas today. And that's partly because markets equilibrate. If you want $6 or $8 gas, just assume $3 or $4 gas and use it accordingly. But it's also because fracking has about 8 important risks or uncertainties that will take at least a decade to resolve. There's the steep decline in production profile and how often do you have to redrill or refract to keep the output going, quantity and contamination of water, transparency around additives, methane leakage, induced seismicity, whether the regulation and the underlying science will mature enough and quickly enough to regain and merit public confidence. And under all that, the discouraging economics of dry gas. The folks who were, until the recent price drops, making any money were making it off the oil, the light sweet crude oil from the Bakken and the Eagle Ford and such, of which the gas was there a byproduct. But those folks are now in a world of hurt at half the oil price, and the dry gas mostly needed around $6 to make money. So it is turning out that if these 8 or so kinds of risk and uncertainty all play out well for the frackers, then we could indeed be glad to have more and cheaper gas, if you like gas, if it can compete. But if not, we won't be unduly disappointed because we weren't going to need so much gas anyway. So there is an important new reality here of abundant and affordably priced energy for the long haul, except the story isn't so much about gas as about its physical hedges, efficiency, and renewables that are outpacing it and increasingly outcompeting it. And those efficiency and renewables resources are so abundant and affordable that our energy future is not fate but choice. And that choice is very flexible. Back in '75, government and industry were all saying that the amount of energy needed to make $1 of real GDP could never go down. We'd be back to caves and candles if we tried to decouple them. And I heretically suggested in a foreign affairs article in '76 that they could go down by threefold. How are we doing? Well, we're down by over twofold so far. Around 2000, we're right within a few percent. And that's what's happened in the first 38 years, despite widespread indifference, often policy opposition, 20-something years of stagnant automotive efficiency standards. That logjam only broke a few years ago. Still rewarding most utilities for selling you more electricity and gas rather than cutting your bills, and a bunch of other obstacles. Imagine what would happen if we actually paid attention and got our act together. And then in Reinventing Fire, 2011, we looked at the further potential, including integrative design and the new delivery and financing and marketing methods. Guess what? We could take that factor 3 gain in total energy productivity and double it again at only half the original cost. So to solve the energy problem, we just needed to enlarge it and integrate it. And the results may at first seem astounding. They actually surprised us a bit. But as Marshall McLuhan said, only puny secrets need protection. Big discoveries, he said, are protected by public incredulity. Now, combine the electricity and oil revolutions, and you have the really big story, Reinventing Fire, where business, enabled and sped by smart policies even at state level, in mindful markets, can lead countries like ours completely off oil and coal by 2050, saving $5 trillion, growing the economy 2.6-fold, and by eliminating the oil and coal and reducing the gas, cutting fossil carbon emissions by 82 to 86%. Now, if you like any one or more of those outcomes, you could support this transition without needing to like every outcome and without needing to agree about which outcome is most important. So focusing on outcomes, not motives, can turn gridlock and conflict into a unifying solution to our common energy challenge. And it turns out that these best buys are also the most effective solutions to the big global problems that hazard every country's security and prosperity. You might wonder, what might this look like in China? Because that answer is vital to the security and prosperity of both our countries and of the world. So Rocky Mountain Institute organized a collaboration with the China Energy Group of Berkeley Lab and with the top Chinese energy analytic and policy groups, Energy Research Institute and Energy Foundation China, both sponsored by the National Development and Reform Commission. And from these four organizations, about 45 analysts have been completing a uniquely rigorous and economically explicit 2-year effort to apply the logic I've just described for the United States to China using Chinese models, modelers, data, examples, conditions. And the aim of this exercise is largely to help inform the 13th five-year plan, the choices being made this year about that, and the energy authors of that plan are basically our customers. And our preliminary results, still subject to change, suggest that China could probably have about a 7-fold bigger GDP in 2050, that's an official goal, using slightly more energy than today and getting over half that energy from non-fossil sources, all at lower cost than business as usual. So that means the GDP per unit of fossil fuel, you might think of it as carbon productivity, could rise by 7-fold or so. And the peak carbon target that President Xi recently promised, although this will take hard work, can be achieved and even surpassed in time. And indeed, China's coal burn last year went down even as the economy grew by more than 7%. Very encouraging news. It's also gratifying that in the United States, the first 3 years of our own 40-year journey seem nicely on track for a reinventing fire trajectory, and for renewables, we're actually tracking a bit ahead of schedule. So our little team at RMI helps smart companies and occasionally governments get unstuck and speed this journey via lots of sectoral initiatives and projects. Of course, there is still a lot of old thinking around too. As the former oilman Maurice Strong said, not all the fossils are in the fuel. But as the former chairman of DuPont, Edgar Woolard, said, organizations that are hampered by old thinking won't be a problem, because in the long run they won't be around. What I've described for you is not just a once-in-a-civilization business opportunity. It's one of the greatest transformations in the history of our species. We humans are inventing a new fire, not dug from below, but flowing from above. I've even heard of theologians talk about energy from hell and energy from heaven. And the new fire is not scarce but bountiful, not local but everywhere, not transient but permanent, not costly but free to operate. And but for the transitional tail of natural gas and a little biofuel grown in ways that sustain and endure, this new fire is flameless, and efficiently used, it really could make energy do our work without working our undoing. Each of you owns a piece of this $5 trillion prize, and our book describes how each of you can capture that opportunity. There's a nice conversation going on at reinventingfire.com. So let me invite you to join that, to engage with us, with each other, with everyone around you, to continue helping to make the world healthier, richer, fairer, cooler, and safer by together reinventing fire. And I thank you all most humbly for who you are and what you all do. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Amory. We have a few questions. Actually, a lot of questions. Actually, way too many questions. So
Well, I'm sure I said nothing controversial.
Yeah, yeah, I can tell from some of these questions. First, let me just very briefly say, of course, as I said in the introduction, this is the John H. Chafee Memorial Lecture. Chafee, we recognize him in this lecture because on a political front, he was what I always thought as pragmatic idealism. And actually, while we look at you and think a lot about this sort of as being idealistic, actually the great thing about Amory Lovins is he is nothing if not pragmatic. And that's the great thing. You combine pragmatism with idealism and really great things can happen. So, and noting John Chafee was also, as they said, that last little bullet there, really timely. He was chairman of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. Without naming names, where we are today is a very long way from where we were then, and let us hope that one day we will return. When Amory was talking about cars, I decided to truth test him in real time, and so I walked to the back of the hall and asked somebody who I thought might know about this, okay, what do you think? Is Amory on target about this? And I got a thoughtful reply, but the first 4 words were Amory is spot on. And the person I was asking is actually Nahar Patel, who is the vice president for business for Toyota Motors. And so I think that's a pretty good testimonial, and I think real-time truth testing worked in that case.
I hope you'll get that 1/X into real production intent and market product soon. It can be an amazing winner if you combine that with advanced powertrain.
You can ask Nahar afterwards. Okay, we've got way too many questions. There's a wonderful reception waiting outside the room. So what I want to do is ask if I can maybe squeeze in about 5 quick questions.
Mm-hmm.
Quick. Do you have a top 3 policy wish list?
Size and revenue neutral fee baits for autos. You'll find a nice piece on how to do that from an industry workshop we held at rmi.org. Decoupling and shared savings for gas and electric utilities, and desubsidizing the entire energy sector.
Amory, I've read your Reinventing Fire twice and support the constructs you've laid out. I'm not sure how we achieve those goals, however, without internalizing the externalities of our current inefficient policies or incentivizing actions. I think you actually just touched upon that a little bit.
Gee, and you read it twice. Well, okay, let me just remind you, it assumed all externalities are worth 0 and it still saved $5 trillion net present value. So if you're able to internalize those larcenous costs, as Garrett Hardin called them, that'll make the savings even juicier. But, it makes money even without doing that. So if you think that internalizing those costs might take a while. Just get on with making money. Meanwhile, $5 trillion on the table is a pretty good incentive, and that's, I think, part of why the private sector is moving so aggressively.
Excellent. So this is a thing that I think it's generally referred to as the rebound effect. Do you believe that increase in energy efficiency will really decrease energy consumption? Or if we get efficient, will we simply have 5 very efficient cars rather than 1 inefficient one?
I don't care if you do, because you can only drive one at a time. And in any case, have you noticed anybody with crude oil prices just dropping by half and gasoline at a long-time low? Have you noticed anybody saying, oh, gasoline's cheap, I'm going to take the long route to work today? Or having commuted, I'll just drive back and forth for the hell of it? No, we're busy. We're already driving an hour a day. That's about as much as we want to drive. Nor do people rewash clothes that are already clean. Nor do people turn down the thermostat in their more efficient refrigerator because the milk would freeze. There are a lot of really basic problems with the rebound notion. It is a real effect. It is just, in general, leaving aside small pathological cases, it is a small effect. It's typically down in the few percent range. We did properly count it in this and in our Winning the Oil Endgame analysis to the degree supported by professional literature. There is some rather low-quality literature out there suggesting it's a very large effect, but this has never actually been observed.
Excellent. So I'm actually going to turn this next very short question into 3 very short questions. So it's the elevator pitch. So you're in the elevator, 3 separate elevators. One, the CEO of, it says a CEO. So let's say you're in with the, and maybe you've actually done this, CEO of either Toyota or General Motors. What's your 30-second elevator?
I'd like to help you make more money at less risk and provide better mobility services at lower costs. And part of the key to that is de-risking your business, saving 80% of your capital, and making fabulous automobiles using the great skills in your company. And these autos will weigh 3 times less. They will use no oil. They'll do everything same or better. And people will buy them not because they're efficient, but because they're better, just like they buy digital media instead of vinyl phonograph records.
You can ask Naher whether his CEO would, how he'd respond to that message, hopefully positively. Second elevator pitch.
By the way, I was the anchor tenant on Bill Ford's Transformation Advisory Council, along with Paul Hawken and Peter Senge, 2006-9, and I'm quite pleased by what happened. Watch this space.
Fantastic. So, second elevator pitch, the President of the United States. So you've got 30 seconds. He's on his way to the Capitol, say last week, to give his State of the Union. What would be the 30 seconds you would want in that speech?
Mr. President, you've been given on 3 occasions copies of a book called Reinventing Fire, which I don't, which I understand you probably haven't had time to read, but many of your advisors have, and it's a route to trans-ideologically solving our energy problem, enabled by policy, led by business for profit, and bypassing Washington gridlock. I'd like to talk to you about it.
Finally, one other head of state in a very different situation, Prime Minister Modi of India.
Prime Minister, we've been working with the Indian government and, with the Chinese government lately, and our partners there have figured out how to increase energy productivity about 5-fold, carbon productivity about 7-fold cheaper than business as usual. I think your potential in India is probably even greater because you've built only about half the share of infrastructure so far that China's already built, and it's a lot easier to build things right than fix them later. We would welcome the privilege to help Indian institutions figure out what a similar strategy would look like in your country. I think this could be great for your economy, security, and social development.
Thank you, Amory. I finally close now with this plaque for you, thanking you for the address tonight. And I just want to say we thought a lot about what to put in these brief little remarks here, and I wanted to combine what I think is great here. It's an appreciation for your services to mankind and the natural world upon which we all depend. And I think that sort of summarizes the goal and the outcome of what has been an amazing life of work so far, and hopefully decades and decades to come ahead. Amory Lovins.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. The reception is outside. Excellent. Excellent.